Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the very fun subject of my least favourite books that I read in 2021 and also all of the books that I did end up DNFing. Now, I don't really love talking about books that I didn't like. I don't think I'm very good at it because I don't want to offend anyone because this might be a book that you liked, and if you do like it, this is not saying anything about you or your taste. These books were just not for me. They just didn't work for whatever reason. So I have 10 books that I didn't like, and then also, let me check, and then also 10 books that I DNF'd this year, which is everything that I DNF'd. So I'm not a huge DNFer, and I won't go into huge amounts of detail about the books I DNF'd either. I don't think it's fair to give a review of a book that you didn't complete. The birds outside my window are being incredibly loud today, so I apologise if you can hear them, but that is the circumstances we are working with. We are also working with the circumstances of a very dark, gloomy January day, but the lighting seems to be fine. So let's begin with those DNFs, since I think we can get through them fairly swiftly. These are not in the order that I read them, they're just in the order that the Storygraph puts them in, and Storygraph also doesn't separate by year. I have checked, these are all books that I DNF'd in 2021, but they are not in any specific order. I DNF'd Cunning Women by Elizabeth Lee. This was a book that I read when I was reading books about witches, and it was fine, but it was very much an insta-love romantic story. There was nothing really beautiful or special about the writing, and all of the characters felt incredibly underdeveloped. I knew I would end up giving it a 2.5 to 3, depending on what it did with the rest of the story, and it was getting towards the end of the year and I just really wasn't interested in it. It was just sort of blah and meh, and that just didn't really work for me. So I have pushed through other books that I think are of a similar calibre to this one. Because of the time of the year it caught me and the frame of mind that it caught me in, I ended up not finishing that one. I also DNF'd Learwife by J.R. Thorpe, and this is a retelling of King Lear, or a expansion on the King Lear world, where about Lear's wife, who is a character we presume dead in the Shakespeare play King Lear, but in this book she has been sent to a nunnery for some unknown reason, and this is set after the death of Lear and his 3 daughters. I got this as a proof on NetGalley, and partially the reason I maybe struggled with it was because I was reading it in an ebook, which is my least favourite format, and I was reading it in drips and drabs, so I didn't get through it very quickly. And I think that maybe I would prefer this book if I got through it very quickly, because the sort of 30% that I read was incredibly repetitive and very, very slow moving, and nothing, like, not only did nothing happen, but the description was the same over and over again. I think perhaps Thorpe was trying to get across the sort of repetitiveness of Lear's wife's situation, but I found it really, really boring, and I didn't think that it really did anything, brought anything new to the Lear story or added anything to it. Also, it was never really explained why a nunnery was chosen, because Lear is a, like, pre-Christian king, like, he is pre-Christ, not just pre-Christian England, and so I was they were like, there wouldn't have been nunneries. So obviously it's a retelling, you can do what you like, but it was never really, I never really understood why a nunnery was chosen for this. Maybe it was just to tell the story of women at this period, but she was so incredibly isolated. Yeah, it just didn't really work for me. Also, the writing was, I like beautiful and poetic writing, but this writing was just trying too hard. I think I've spent a lot of time going in detail about these first 2 books, sorry. Then we also have Conversations in the Cathedral, which I was reading for my reading books from Spanish-speaking South America. I only read the first 20 pages of this 700-page book. I really didn't get very far into it at all, but there were, I think, 4 racial slurs in the first 20 minutes, and I think it was a commentary on Argentina and what it is like in, no, not Argentina, Peru, and what it is like in Peru in the 1970s, but it just really didn't work for me. I was just not in the mental headspace to be reading a book like that, so I DNF'd it. I also DNF'd Sharks in the Rivers by Ada Limon. This was a collection of poetry, and I DNF'd it. I started to read it in January. I kept intending to go back to it, and I just never did. I found it really hard to connect with the poetry, to understand the point of any of the poetry. I don't know if I was just out of the practice of reading poems, but I didn't really understand what was going on any of the time. I felt really dense, and I have a master's in poetry and have studied poetry, so I feel like that added to my feeling of feeling dense, because I was like, I should understand this, but I really didn't, and so I ended up DNFing it. I might go back to it at some point. I don't know if it's just not for me, that poet. My boyfriend always tries to make as much noise as possible when he knows I'm filming. I also tried to read The Crowfolk by Mark Stay when I was reading books about witches, which is set during the Second World War in an English village, with witches in a village and also magical scarecrows that come to life. It was written like YA but with lots of sex in, or not even YA, like children's fiction but with lots of sex in. Like, it was terribly badly written, and it just, well, not that children's fiction can be written well, but this just didn't seem to work. It was very jarring and it was very dramatic, and I was really surprised by it because I've read a lot of commercial fiction, but this one just felt really odd. I just didn't get on with it at all. Then I tried to read The Burning Tigress by Peter Balakian when I was reading books from Central Asia, which I'll leave in the cards above, and this was a non-fiction book about the Armenian genocide, and I read I think about 40% of this book, but I ended up DNFing it, partly because it was taking me so long to read and I was reading a lot of books in Central Asia and I just felt like I was taking too much time over it, so it wasn't really specific to this book, but also partly because it didn't really engage me and it felt more like a history textbook than a book of history for a lay reader rather than someone studying anything. Then I DNF'd Bombay Stories, which is a collection of short stories by Sadat Hassan Manto, it's a classic from India, Pakistan. He was pre-partition and then ended up in Pakistan post-partition, and I was reading his collection of stories. I don't know if it was just the translator, but the writing itself was kind of awkward and clunky, and the descriptions of women and women as characters were just not up my street, so I ended up DNFing that one as well. And then The Girl of Ink and Stars by Kieran Millwood Hargrave, I also DNF'd. I was reading that one when I was reading books by authors whose books I had loved in the past, like giving authors a second chance. And Kieran Millwood Hargrave has written only one adult book, which is The Mercies, which I read last year and I really, really loved. And this was one of her middle grade books. And since I'd started to get into middle grade, I hoped I would like it. But it was very angsty and very serious. And although I think there probably is a place for that for middle grade readers, for me, middle grade, I just want kind of escapist fantasy charm and whimsy, and I don't really want that like really serious themes to be part of my reading of middle grade. It's not what I'm going to middle grade for, so it just didn't work for me. Then when I was reading books from Southern Africa, I was trying to read What We Lose by Zinzi Clemens, who is a South African American writer. This was set in modern South Africa, and so I wanted to read that because there were so many books from South Africa that I discovered, and so I was trying to read a more recent one. I really didn't get on board with the writing of this one, and I just found it it didn't really engage with South Africa, and it was a bit strange, and it also it felt very melodramatic and just very American, not very South African American, so I just ended up giving that one up. And then finally, Those Who Are Loved by Victoria Hislop, I started reading when I was reading the best-selling historical fiction of 2020 back at the start of 2021, and it was about the civil war in Greece after the Second World War, but it was one of the most melodramatic books I've ever tried to read with entirely stock characters, and I just had to DNF it. So yeah, those are my 10 DNFs from 2021. Now let's talk about the 10 books that were my least favourite. I haven't put these in an order of least favourite, and some of these are much better than others, so it's kind of an odd list, but I'm just going to go from the one I read first through the list. The first one I read was the Book of Queer Prophets, which I read during the Queer Lit Readathon, because there was a prompt for reading a book about religion, or a religious person in relation to their queer identity, and this is a anthology of different queer people talking about their relationship with religion. And I thought that some of the writers were good, but the problem with an anthology is a lot of the writers were not my favourite, and that kind of put me off a little bit as well. That kind of put me off, which often happens with an anthology. It's quite hard to find an anthology where you like the writing by every single writer. But on top of that, I found that this book, I think, was like 95% Christian and Western, and so I really thought that this has been marketed as the Book of Queer Prophets, but it's the book of British and American Christian queer people, and so there weren't a lot of people of colour, there weren't a lot of different religions. There was like one from a Muslim perspective, one from a Jewish perspective, and that was it. And so I wanted more diversity. If you're going to call your book the Book of Queer Prophets, you want to talk to queer Hindu people, queer Sikh people, queer Buddhist people, and more queer Muslims and Jewish people as well, rather than it being so specifically Christian. And I think that should have been part of the marketing for it. And there was something else that I thought it was, and I can't remember, that I had a problem with it for. It was another thing where I was like, it needed to be either more specifically labelled or more broad, and that kind of put me off, yeah. Then The Raging Quiet, which I think is over there. I'm not going to go get it because I might knock my tripod over. This was by Cheryl Jordan, and I read this for my book club. One of my other friends suggested it because she'd started reading it as a teen and she just wanted to finish it. This is a YA historical fiction about a girl who gets married to an abusive man and ends up forming a relationship with a deaf boy. And I found it like not great written. Like, this is early 2000s YA, not even modern YA, so the writing itself was not the best, and on top of that it was also a really weird, like ableist, full of ableist tropes, and weird about historical stuff as well. It was just didn't seem particularly well researched, and full of like, this girl can save this boy who is misunderstood because of his disability. Deafness was not that, like, deafness exists, so I'm surprised that people wouldn't like not have been aware of deafness in medieval England, or Ireland actually. I think it was set in medieval Ireland, but yeah, it just felt really under researched. Like, it didn't really have much. It was very melodramatic, the characters were underdeveloped again, and yeah, I just didn't really feel any sort of attachment to it, but I didn't expect to going in, like, it's not my genre anyway. Then one that I was really hoping I was going to like and I was really excited for, and that is Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. This is about a Malaysian American woman who is travelling back to Malaysia after the death of her grandmother with her parents, so they've had to move back to Malaysia because of finances, but just before they leave she starts to hear the voice of her ama talking to her and wanting revenge, and she gets back to Malaysia and gets involved with the gods in Malaysia. The Blackwater Sister is one lesser god in Malaysia, and organised crime ring, and lots of supernatural violence. And I found the writing of this to be pretty poor. It wasn't beautiful and it wasn't developed, and the characters were very over the top, and the action was particularly what I struggled with in this book. Like, I don't hugely love a book with a great deal of plot anyway, but the action in this book seemed to be like a cartoon. Like, it felt very Scooby-Doo, but with a lot of swearing, I think, and sex. Not a lot of sex, but like with swearing and sexual things, and I was just like, this is a weird mashup. Like, there was a lot of like, and suddenly it was revealed to be this person, and I had suddenly all of these superpowers and couldn't be stopped in any way. It felt like an outline for a book that wasn't very well developed, and so I really wanted to like this one, but it didn't work for me. Like, fantasy isn't my genre anyway, and again, like I've said, I don't hugely love a really plotty book, because I find a lot of the time, if there is a lot of plot, you have underdeveloped your characters and underdeveloped the points from getting from point A to point B. I was hoping it would be more on the magical realist end, and it really just wasn't. So another book that I read for the reading the best-selling historical fiction was The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. This is set in Depression era America in the Appalachian Mountains, about a pack horse library. There's this British woman who gets married to this American man and ends up in the States in a kind of abusive relationship, as far as I remember, getting involved with this pack horse library, and it's this uppity British woman who is knocked off her high horse by getting on a horse and riding through the mountains and visiting the poverty of Appalachia during the Depression. I just found this book to be incredibly predictable. Again, no beauty to the writing, no interest in the writing, gung-ho and idealistic view of the world. Even though there was a lot of tragedy in it, it was kind of like a simplistic and soap opera level of understanding of tragedy and trauma, and these banding together women, a very predictable romance that happened, and I just felt overall, also like queer coding of characters, like really strongly queer coding, but no, they're not gay. We're gonna have a straight relationship for every single woman in this book. She cannot possibly be single. She must have a romantic relationship, and it must be with a man. I can understand that this would be a very popular book. If you like writers like Kristen Hanna, I think you would like this book, but it really just didn't work for me. Now the next one is kind of the most, I think a lot of these books you could understand why I didn't like them, because they're either not my genre or they're more commercial than my personal taste. They're more about plot than about writing, etc. But this next one is like literary fiction that a lot of people love, from a very popular writer, and just didn't get on with it at all, and that is Revenge by Yoko Ogawa, which is a collection of slightly dark and twisty short stories translated from Japanese, about lots of different people in Japan. They're kind of slightly interlinked with kind of creepy, magical, dark overtones, things that happen. I love creepy, dark short stories. I love interconnected short stories, in particular books with touch of the magic to them that's never explained. Absolutely my favourite thing. These were so boring. I'm sorry, but they were so boring. The writing, absolutely no beauty whatsoever, just very flat. The flattest of writing possible. Characters that had no emotions, no thoughts, no feelings, just plonk this person in, weird thing happens to them. And I was just so surprised that these are really well hyped, because there's just nothing to them, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I found it a chore to get through for a tiny book. This is why I don't like talking about things I don't like about books. I feel like I can't elaborate very well, and sometimes it's just like, I just didn't like it. Another one that I feel bad about is After the Flood by Cassandra Montag. I feel bad because this was in a video where I was reading books that I had been recommended by you guys, by the people who watch my videos, and the fact that this is in my least favourite books of 2021 is kind of, I feel sorry about that because someone specifically recommended it to me. But I don't like dystopian fiction, I think. I think maybe I could like a small, slow, character-based, no-plot story that is dystopian. But in general, I don't really like dystopian, particularly when it's very plotty like this one was, particularly when it's melodramatic like this one was. Very predictable, kind of over the top. Didn't really explore the interiority of any of these characters. Again, they were very over the top, melodramatic archetype characters, very predictable what was going to happen, and I just don't really care for that in extremis what will humans do, especially when it is the same thing that they've been doing in dystopian fiction since H.G. Wells. Like, and then we have 3 books that I read when I was reading the Goodreads Choice Awards historical fiction, which I will leave linked to the cards above if you haven't seen it already. But as happened last year, a lot of these books, even though I love historical fiction, I don't like that kind of historical fiction. So the first one on here is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. The thing that I particularly annoyed about this book was that it clearly hadn't been looked over by a person who lived in London even, let alone someone who actually is from the UK, because it had a lot of things that people from the UK would never say coming out of British people's mouths, and it just felt like, oh, you've come here on holiday and you've written a book set here. And because there was no research there, it felt like the historical period, there was clearly no research done. Like, the historical period didn't feel particularly well researched either. There was absolutely no atmosphere. The writing was rubbish. I'm sorry. And again, the characters, I couldn't tell you a distinguishing feature about any of the characters except their age. Like, everything else about them, they were the same. They had no different thoughts or feelings or motivations. They were just the same. Like, there was no atmosphere of the time period, which I love from historical fiction. There was no effort made with the characters. There was no effort made with the writing. There was no effort made with the research. It was really not for me at all. I also read The Personal Librarian by Maria Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray, and this was about Belle de Costa Green, who was the personal librarian for JP Morgan, and this could have been a really interesting story about this white passing black woman who passed as white and entered into the art world with the money of one of the richest bankers, and travelled around and got involved in the art scene and involved with these incredibly rich people, but was in a lot of danger because of being a black woman, because that could have been found out. And she was the daughter of an African-American, of a campaigner for black rights in America. And there is in fact another book about this coming out this year, which I'm excited for and I'm hoping will be really good, because this one had all that potential, but she was just a kick-ass woman who could never do any wrong. She was never really in any peril or danger of being found out. She was always like getting the best line in at the end. All the other characters were rubbish and awful, and she was just the best ever. So much about just how great this woman was. The writers had obviously discovered something about this woman and thought that the world needed to know more about her, and they just had to make her absolutely perfect and throw in all this melodrama but never put her in any actual risk. And I just, yeah, just wasn't for me. And then the final one from that vlog that I read that I really didn't like was The Paris Library by Janet Skesley and Charles. I don't really read a huge amount of World War II fiction anyway, particularly for this reason, for the reason of this book. I feel like a lot of it is this sort of romanticised view of the war and of the people being the Blitz spirit. Not that this was set in Britain, this was set in Paris, among Parisians, but Parisians who fucking love the Americans. It was always about, the Americans will save us, we will be saved by the Americans have joined the war, and so they will come and rescue us with their godlike bodies and their powerful army. And it was just like, it didn't really feel very authentic to Paris, and the Parisians that I have interacted with, who had been more like, lots of these quirky characters whose only characteristics were their quirkiness. They didn't feel like real Cubans. And again, melodramatic relationships and the nuances and complexities of being in occupation weren't really explored at all. And it just felt very like basic, and it also had a 1980s timeline that felt pointless and entirely unnecessary. One of my pet peeves with historical fiction is when there are two time periods. One is more modern, and this modern piece really needs to be explained. Like, it really needs to work. Like, one of the most disappointing books of the year, bonus for you, for me, was The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which I absolutely adored, would have been my favourite book, age extent of it, but there was this 20% that was a modern timeline that was there for no reason and was really annoying. And I don't mind there being a modern timeline, but you have to have a reason for it beyond just wanting to connect your author to you, just wanting a everyman character for your reader. I need something really strong reason for the modern timeline to be included. And so the final one that's on this list, and the one that I've read most recently, was The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. Now, if you've been around on this channel for a while, you may know that I've sort of been dipping my toes into romance as a sort of easy comfort read, but some of them are really bad. And this was one of them. I read it because it was very hyped. People were talking about it a lot as a really good romance book. It was all over TikTok. It was in the like Goodreads romance shortlist. I was looking for something easy to read whilst I was in isolation from COVID. I picked this, and I really wish I hadn't. It's really long, like 400 pages. I don't think a romance can really explain being that long for the most part. It had this like grumpy sunshine thing where the guy is this broody, mooding guy, but he so clearly fancied her. Like, the whole setup is that she needs someone to go to a wedding with her because she left Spain after a bad breakup with a guy who is the brother of her sister's fiance, and she's going back for that wedding, and he's just recently turned out to be engaged, and she doesn't want to turn up alone after whatever happened between them that really traumatized her, and so he agrees to go as her fake date. But like, the setup is that he overhears her saying this, and he's like, I'll go with you, I'll be your date, and she's like, oh, you're joking, and then he's like, no, I'm not. And when she realizes he's not joking, she's not like, okay, why would you want to do that? Is it because you fancy me? Because I see you everywhere? Like, it just felt really obvious. The banter between them was so cringy, and the main thing that really wound me up was that every single time, sometimes like twice in one page, he was described as being huge and her tiny, just over and over and over again. Like, that needed an edit, and it turned out that this was self-published and very obvious, because I don't need this over and over again reinforcing that he is giant and she is tiny. He is giant, she is tiny, she's so little, look at her tiny hands and his big paws. Like, just pissed me off, kind of, in the end. And I just didn't care about them getting together. I wanted them both to fall down a well. And that is the end of me ranting about books I didn't like. I hope you have enjoyed this video. It's not my usual style. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope I haven't upset anyone. If you did like any of these books, I'm sure there are plenty of reasons that you could have enjoyed them. They just didn't work for me. Thank you for watching, and please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to let me know in the comments what your least favourite book of 2021 was. I mean, someone told me the other, on one of my last videos, my best books of the year, that they DNF'd The Promise, which was my second favourite book of the year, according to that video. So obviously people dislike books that I love, so if you love these books, I hope you are not offended. And please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos every Thursday and Sunday, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!